I'm worried about Daniel. But how do I tell everyone? How do I convince them that my husband is no longer my husband? We're often told how perfect we are for each other, how right we seem together. But now, I don't think anyone would recognize us. They wouldn't say that Daniel was a different man, though. I don't think they would see the changes I've seen. They would blame the relationship. People grow apart, they would say. People change. These things happen. I met Daniel when I was at my lowest point, in the grip of a deep and dark depression. He didn't know how damaged I was, and he expected nothing from me. He saved me from myself without even knowing he was doing it, and he never asked anything from me in return. I love him so much. We moved into our first house together just before lockdown started. It was the perfect place for us. A house in the countryside, but barely close to a major city. Big enough for us to host parties, and maybe one day raise a family. A huge garden that would give our dogs plenty of room to run around in, once we had some dogs at least. And best of all, it was a real fixer-upper. We were ready to transform a dirty, neglected old house into a home. Our home. Then lockdown hit. All of our plans were put on hold. We barely had any of our furniture in the house. And the decorating had hardly even begun. We were living in a bare shell. It wasn't ideal, but we made it work. We were still happy, but then Daniel went missing. I woke up one morning and he wasn't in the bed. That was unusual, because Daniel was always up first. What worried me was that I couldn't find him in the house, or the garden. He wasn't doing one of the million DIY jobs that were waiting for us, or cooking himself breakfast, or even sitting on the pile of cushions that were our makeshift couch, watching Netflix on my laptop. The two of us took daily walks in the woods behind our house, so I guessed he might be there. The car was still parked in the driveway, but he could have walked to the nearest convenience store 2.5 miles away to get milk and eggs or something. Daniel didn't like being cooped up, and he was always looking for excuses to get out and stretch his legs. I was sure he'd be back in no time. 2 agonizing days later, I woke up from a restless night to sounds coming from somewhere below me. I flew down the stairs to find Daniel sanding the floorboards in the dining room. I threw my arms around him and screamed with happiness and relief, tears streaming down my face as I sobbed and covered him with wet kisses. The rest of the day went by in a blur, and we contacted our friends and family and the police to let them know that Daniel was back and he was fine. According to Daniel, he had gone for an early walk in the woods and got lost. He eventually found his way back to the house, back to me, and he was completely fine. At first, I didn't notice anything that was wrong. It didn't take long for me to realize that something was off with Daniel. The man I knew, the man I'd learned inside and out, was the most chilled out guy ever. He was even a little emotionally repressed, while I was a lightning rod of emotions and wore my heart on my sleeve. Daniel was quiet and contemplative. Didn't say anything emotional unless he thought about it for hours beforehand. He was occasionally silly, always thoughtful, never confrontational. But this Daniel, this new Daniel, was different. He smiled too much, for a start. His posture was too upright, too perfect. His laugh was too loud, too wild. When we tried to emulate Daniel's silliness and our little in-jokes, they were stittled and wrong. Worst of all, the way he told me he loved me. He would hold my gaze with dark, still eyes, a smile tugging in the corner of his mouth, like he was trying not to laugh. "I love you," he said, cupping a hand to my face. The words were robotic, practiced, over-rehearsed. Before I knew it, I'd lived with the imposter for a week. Every day I kept wondering, how can I prove that this isn't the man I married? I tried to search his phone for evidence, but I couldn't find it anywhere. Whenever I asked him about it, he'd just say he must have misplaced it and would shrug it like it's no big deal. Daniel would never do that. Just like everyone else in our generation, he's addicted to his phone. He loves posting house and garden updates to his Instagram story. He would care that his phone is missing. Last night I woke up to find that the imposter wasn't in bed with me. I sat up and looked around the room, and my blood turned cold when I saw him standing in the hall, staring at me through the crack in the door. "What are you doing?" I asked. I was terrified, but my voice was rooted somewhere far beyond that. My voice was angry, impatient, and exhausted. The door creaked open and I saw his smiling face in the moonlight. "I like watching you sleep," he said sweetly. If Daniel, my Daniel, had said something like that to me, I would have gone gooey inside. The imposter made me feel threatened. "You're acting like a creep, Daniel," I said, allowing the certainty of my anger to overtake the shakiness of my fear. "If you're gonna pull this crap tonight, you can sleep downstairs. You've been acting weird all week, and I'm sick of it." Without another word, he turned and headed down the hallway. I laid my head down on the pillow and listened as he slowly descended the stairs. When he reached the bottom, his footsteps stopped. I imagined him just standing there, silent and motionless. A mix of fear and anger flared up in me again, and I threw myself out of bed, storming to the top of the stairs, ready to confront him. Just as I reached the staircase, he stepped out of view. I got back in bed and tugged the sheets up to my chin, wrapping myself in them like a burrito until I felt snug and safe. I missed my Daniel. I missed the familiarity of his touch, his hugs, and his kisses. This imposter felt nothing like Daniel. I wouldn't let him touch me again. Every time he did, my skin would crawl. I eventually fell asleep, but once or twice in the night I clearly woke up to a spine-tingling sensation that I was being watched. Finally today, something happened. I don't know if people will consider it evidence, or if it'll make anyone believe what I'm saying. I know it's completely ridiculous. It sounds insane. This morning, Daniel was making me breakfast. He was smiley, chipper, and talkative. I told him I wasn't in the mood for pancakes. I wanted bacon. He tried to tell me that we didn't have any bacon, but I snapped at him and told him I already knew that. I told him that I wanted bacon, and if he wanted to make up for being such a creep last night, he would go to the store and get me some. I'm not sure what I hoped to accomplish. Maybe to rile him up and see what he would do. Maybe just to get rid of him for a while. But when he left, he tried to kiss me. I turned away and he kissed my cheek instead. I shrugged. "I'm not sure what I've done to upset you," he said. "But I'll make it all better, I promise." Once he was gone, I decided to scour the house for clues. There had to be something that could prove that the man living inside my house wasn't really Daniel. If I hadn't found it yet, it's because I wasn't looking closely enough. I started looking around downstairs, opening boxes and drawers and overturning what little furniture we had to see if I could find... What? I felt ridiculous, but I was still determined. I tore at hanging flaps of old wallpaper, overturned our mattress, emptied the closet. I tore up plants in the garden with my bare hands, ripped open the cushions of our makeshift couch, and pulled up the edges of the carpet. Eventually, when I was worn down and exhausted, I collapsed in the hallway upstairs, leaning my head against the wall and letting the tears come freely. The imposter would be back soon, and I'd be forced to face the deepening void where the real Daniel had used to be. The imposter's presence made it all too much worse. It only highlighted to me how much I missed my Daniel. But what if he were my Daniel? The thought occurred to me like an icy crossbow bolt to the chest. As I sobbed, I toyed with the threadbare wallpaper, tugging at the torn edges and tearing off tiny strips. Maybe the things that I was worried other people might say had been my own worries. We'd grown apart, we'd changed, these things happen. I grabbed another piece of paper and pulled. Instead of tearing off another strip, a whole section of wall seemed to wobble. I froze, wondering if I'd imagined it or if I was losing it completely. I hauled myself up onto my knees and dug my fingers into the edge that was hidden, cleverly, in the decade-old design of the wallpaper. I traced the edge around until I realized what I had found. A door. I dug my fingers into the edge and pulled. With a reluctant groan, the door swung open. I found myself staring into a closet. It was nondescript, with white walls and a single hanging light bulb that switched on and off the pull chain. There were no shelves, no hangers. Just one item laying on the ground. It was Daniel's phone. I snatched it up hungrily and tried tapping the screen, but the battery was empty. I ran into the bedroom and plugged it in, missing the socket for the first 2 or 3 attempts because of my shaking hands. I waited, my eyes fixed to the screen, trying to will the phone back to life. Then I heard the front door open and close, and the imposter's voice called out, "Honey, I'm home." Ugh, screw you, I hissed under my breath. The phone finally sprang to life and I typed in Daniel's passcode. I went into his messages and saw that the last person he'd sent anything to was me. There were red exclamation marks next to the messages he'd tried to send to me, and I opened them, my body turning cold as my hands started trembling uncontrollably. The last few messages read, "Babe, I don't know what happened. I thought I heard something, so I got up, and I found this hidden door that led into a dark hallway." Did he mean the same door I had just found? But it wasn't a hallway, it was a closet. I went inside and it was like a maze. Now I'm lost. I can't get any signal. I'm scared. All the messages were sent between 3 and 3:30 a.m. Tears dripped onto the screen of his phone and I realized I was crying again. I could hear the imposter moving around downstairs, the smell of sizzling bacon drifting up from the kitchen. I locked the phone and wiped my tears off the screen, accidentally swiping to the camera. I was about to close it when I noticed a tiny preview in the bottom corner of the last thing that Daniel had taken a photo of. I unlocked the phone again and went into the photo album. The last 3 items were 2 videos and a photo. In the first video from the night of his disappearance, Daniel got out of bed. I appeared on the screen briefly, groaning and turning onto my side when the light from the camera glared at my face. Daniel went out into the hallway, followed by a noise that sounded like a finger tapping on the inside of the walls. He discovered the concealed door and struggled for a minute or two to get enough purchase on the door and pull it open. When he did, the room beyond wasn't a room at all. The light bulb was still hanging there, but a passage stretched on and into the darkness. The video cut and I swiped to the next. When I pressed play, the camera was swinging around wildly, and Daniel was breathing frantically. Instead of a single long passage, he was now in a labyrinth of blind corners, moving dizzyingly fast as he struggled to find his way out. "I'm stuck," his voice said. I teared up again. His voice was like fresh air. The difference between him and the imposter seemed to be subtle at first, but now it seemed like night and day. "Where the hell am I?" The video ended and I swiped to the next. Instead of a video, I was faced with a photo instead. I felt nauseous with fear and I looked at the screen. Daniel had tried to take the photo around a corner, so the majority of the screen was obscured by a wall. In the dark hallway beyond, the imposter was standing in the middle of the hallway, staring directly into the camera. "Babe?" The imposter called upstairs. "Yes," I called back. My voice was shaky and weak. "Breakfast ready." "Coming," I called. "Before I go downstairs, I need to let people know. You see my face in the news report because I've gone missing. Just know that I found my way into an endless maze and I fully intend on coming back with Daniel. If you hear about the horrible torture I inflicted on my husband, just know that whatever that thing is, it's not my husband, and it deserves everything coming to it." If you enjoy Creepy Nights content, let us know. Give us a subscribe, a thumbs up, or in the comments, let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. Also, check us out on Instagram for more horrifying content. And if you have any stories of your own that you would like me to personally narrate, check out our subreddit. Until next time, my friends.